As we approach the month of Elul, there's a description from the Frierdiker Rebbe about 4 elements that we need to understand about what Elul is all about. It's a sicha that the Frierdiker Rebbe said on Pesach time. There, the Frierdiker Rebbe describes the spiritual state that you felt that kind of set the atmosphere in Lubavitch on Shabbos Mevorchim Elul. Ir habira shel Admurei Chabad b'meshech shanim rabos, the capital city of the Rebbes of Chabad over many generations. Veilu dvarav, here's what the Frierdiker Rebbe says. Shabbos Mevorchim Elul b'Lubavitch, on Shabbos Mevorchim Elul in the town of Lubavitch, agam shadaino yazayim bohir, even though it was still a bright day, meaning summer's day, shebo zorcha hashemesh, where the sun shone brightly, harishavir kvar ischalef, you could already feel the air changing. You could already sense the aroma, the scent of Elul. And there was already like a wind, an air of Teshuvah that moved through the town. 4 things. Now we know that we know that everything the Rabbeim said is absolutely precise down to the last detail. So therefore, move on, you can understand you must know then that the 4 different descriptions in the Sicha, that all describe Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, namely, Aleph, Oir HaShemesh HaBohir, that there's a bright sun, Beis Chilufu Avir, that the air starts to change, Gimel Argoshas Horeach Shel Elul, the fact that you could smell Elul, Vechein Daled Haruach HaTshuva Shenoshva, and that there's the winds of Tshuva, Eino Melitzas Be'alma, they're not just there to be metaphoric, rather, these are 4 different expressions that convey what Shabbos Mevorchim Elul is all about. Now, before we get to the details of what was said, beyond that, we have to consider the following. The words of our Rabbeim are not only precise in their content, but also in the time when those words were shared. That means that the Rabbeim shared things at the most appropriate times that they should be said. Needless to say, after they said the words, the influence of those words continues, as explained in many places, but when a Rebbe chooses to say something is highly significant. So it's very intriguing then that when would the Frierdiker Rebbe describe Shabbos Mevorchim Elul in a Sicha of Pesach? That indicates that there's a very intrinsic, powerful connection between the 2 times of Pesach and Elul, or at least Shabbos Mevorchim Elul. Now, when you say that, it actually doesn't seem to make any sense, because surely these 2 time frames, the Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, the time of Elul, represented or beginning with Shabbos Mevorchim, or Pesach, not only are these 2 different times and eras, they're actually contradictory. Because in Yonesh Pesach, as we very well know, the whole energy of Pesach is that which flows from above to below, which is represented by Tchila Doi Dili, first what the Eibusha does for me, Vachakach Vani Loy, and then how I respond. Or Kyodu, as we know historically. The fact that the Yidden were taken out of Golus Mitzrayim was not thanks to their efforts. In fact, to the contrary, in fact, we know that prior to leaving Mitzrayim, they were idolaters just like the Egyptians, so they didn't earn the right to leave Mitzrayim. It's the Eibishter's input. It was an arousal from on high, which in turn stimulated and inspired the Jewish people to respond and say, okay, we need to do something for Hashem as well. So Pesach's energy is about the Eibishter taking initiative before we act. Whereas Elul is the exact opposite. It's where all of the avodah starts with us. We first have to make the move towards Hashem. An awakening from below. After which, and in response to, there will be an awakening from on high, that Hashem will respond to us, and put that together, and you get Rosh Tevis Elul. That forms the word Elul. So therefore, we really need to understand how does it make any sense at all for the Frierdiker Rebbe at the time of Pesach, which is the energy of Doidi Li V'ani Loi, to be speaking about and explaining the nature of Elul, Ani Doidi V'Doidi Li? The explanation is actually simpler than we would have imagined. It's similar to the explanation of Chazal on the pasuk that says, the Eibishter says, who preceded me that I owe him anything? In other words, implying that there is no process that ever begins outside of Hashem. Every single process must begin from the Eibishter. Which means that even the things that we achieve through our avodah, the fact that we could do that avodah in the first place is because the Eibishter gave us koyach from on high that allowed us to do that avodah. After that awakening from on high, the deposit, the investment that the Eibishter made in us, then we are empowered to do our part, to put in our effort, to arouse from below a dedication to Hashem. The Alter Rebbe says this about Elul. Yes, Elul is the time I have to make the effort and I have to draw close to Hashem. But how does the Alter Rebbe describe Elul? It's a time where Hashem reveals the 13 attributes of His mercy. Or maybe very famously, the Alter Rebbe gives the mashal of the king who's in the field, which gives the opportunity and gives permission for any person who chooses to approach the king. Right, there's the Ani Ladoidi. You approach the king, but first the king had to be there. Vahainu, meaning that in spite of the fact that Elul is primarily about our avodah reaching upwards through our own efforts to get close to Hashem, and awakening from below, to precipitate the opportunity for that avodah, you first need Hashem's 13 attributes of mercy. And you need the so-called permission and the empowerment from on high to be able to do what Elul has to do. And only after the stage is set and the power is shared, then we could do our avodah, which is to approach Hashem through our efforts. We'll move on. So you could appreciate after we put in our efforts and we create our personal awakening, and then as a result of that there is an esarusa de la'ela, and a divine awakening that follows, that will be nalis hi beharbe mino esarusa de la'ela nimsheches k'agdom el avoda. That result, doidi li, that's going to follow Anita doidi, that's going to be a far superior input from Hashem than what stimulated Elul in the first place. Because what the Eibishter stimulated, what the Eibishter invested at the beginning of Elul, the exposure of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, that was Hashem's free kindness and goodness to us. Anytime that the Eibishter shares something of his own, so to speak, chesed chinam, unrequired kindness, it's always a little bit more external, a little bit more superficial. Whereas when the Eibishter gives us something as a response to our efforts, because we know as an axiom that the Eibishter, so to speak, wishes for our efforts, obviously it's going to be a far deeper, more personal, internal expression of godliness that is shared afterwards. Put it simply, if a person gives something to their child out of goodness, they'll give to one extent. But when they see that their child is put in effort, has grown, has matured, and therefore they want to give their child something in response to that. It will always be much dearer, it will be much more personal. Together with that, we can understand. So now, here's how the process works. We, as people, we put in our efforts. And our efforts achieve magnificent things. We stimulate a response from Hashem which is unprecedented and unexpected. And yet, in order for all of that to happen, we had to have the push from Hashem at the beginning, the kickstart from Hashem at the beginning. So it goes Isarusa de La'ela to Isarusa de Sata to a far greater Isarusa de La'ela. Stimulation from Hashem, response from the humans, which creates a far deeper response from Hashem than his initial stimulation. So what empowers us during the month of Elul to be able to reach out to Hashem? That was thanks to Hashem exposing his 13 attributes of mercy when in Chodesh Elul. Still, yet at the same time, every single spiritual activity or energy has its original time where it begins. And the parking space for Isarusa de La'ela, the source of all Isarusa de La'ela, the beginning of all divine kindness, goodness, and stimulation is when? Pesach time, Kanal, as we said before. Unlike Elul, that may have a component of Isarusa de La'ela, but the main thrust of Elul is our avodah Isarusa de Sato. So we can actually say that the input from Hashem that stimulates the process of Elul that happens through the revelation of the 13 attributes of mercy at the beginning of Elul, that draws its strength from Pesach time. Pesach is the resource center for divine input. So if Elul needs divine input, it's got to reach back to Pesach to get it so Elul could get started. Because as we've described, Pesach is the time for divine input and stimulation. So Pesach is the time of the overarching divine inspiration, which then dishes out whichever specific divine inspiration is required for a specific time. So the Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim are required to get Elul started. Where do they come from? From the reserve bank of Pesach time. Including the 13 attributes of mercy of Elul. That explains why the appropriate time for the Frierdiker Rebbe to say a sicha about Elul and specifically Shabbos and Mevorchim Elul. Why specifically Shabbos and Mevorchim? Because Shabbos and Mevorchim is where, in the most general sense, what is brought into the world is Kol Inyonei HaChodesh Kuloi. Everything that month is going to be about. Including in this specific case the 13 attributes of Hashem's mercy, which stimulate the opportunity for us to reach Hashem. Where did all of that begin? Started on Pesach. With that information, we can understand the 4 different things that were described in that Sicha, to tell us what Shabbos Mevorchim Elul was like in Lubavitch. You could take the 4 descriptions and put them into 2 categories. One is about the beauty of the sunshine of summer, which is described in the first part of the Sicha. As the Frierdiker Rebbe says, it was still a bright day and still a shining sun. And then you have, at the same time, Chilufu Avir, then at the same time, you have a second component, shifting atmosphere, different smell, the concept of the winds of tshuva. The shining of the sun, that is, so to speak, from on high, that represents the Isarusa de La'ela. On a deeper level, what the sun represents is it represents the radiance of godliness. The sun is often used as a symbol of godliness. which is, so to speak, the radiance drawing from the power of Nisan to shine into Elul, to give us the stimulation to be able to be empowered to do what Elul requires. Then the other three things that are described, that will represent our response. Once we have been touched by, warmed by, and illuminated by the sun representing the input from on high, then you'll see our response in these three steps. What are the three steps? We talk about the response by people, by us, which is a response to what the Eibishter has given us. The Frierdiker Rebbe effectively speaks about two things. You could scent, you could smell Elul, and basically, and there's this wind of tshuva that blows through the town. So, what is the connection between smell and wind to the concepts of Elul and tshuva? So, what have we got? We've got the sun. The sun causes the changing of atmosphere, which translates into a smell and into a wind. Really, the core, the essence of tshuva is, as the pasuk says, that the spirit of the soul should return to Hashem who gave it. Which means that the primary element of tshuva is that a person has to be elevated to a level of ruach, which in our particular context actually represents a spiritual dimension that is even higher than the dimension of or, of light, which usually is described as this incredible degree of godliness. When a person touches and experiences this concept of ruach, it brings them back to Hashem. That's something the Frierdiker Rebbe alluded to by saying that there was the wind of tshuva. Because what he wanted us to know is he wanted us to know that the primary focus of Elul is the concept of tshuva, and the concept of tshuva is this concept of ruach, the ruach dimension of the neshama, which supersedes even the concept of or, of, in a sense, like awareness of Hashem, to be able to connect to Hashem himself. Which also links us to the concept of smell. Because Ikra Avodah Dani L'Doide Be'Elul, the Avodah Tshuva, as we have described, the primary Avodah that we're supposed to invest in during Elul is the Avodah of Tshuva. And Tshuva is supposed to bring us to one ultimate goal, to bring us to Mashiach. Mashiach is primarily represented by the concept of smell, as the pasuk says, he will smell fear of God. As the Gemara tells us, how do we test if the candidate is actually Mashiach? If he can smell and by that judge who is who and whether people are righteous or not. So what have we got? We've got the input from Hashem, the sun shining, which is this awakening from on high, that then shifts the whole energy, which we'll talk about in a second. The air itself changes, and that creates a response of the winds of Elul, which represent us, Haruach Toshuv, that the spirit of our own neshama connects to Hashem, through which we get the reach, the smell of Elul, which is actually the smell of Mashiach, because Teshuvah brings Mashiach. So in order to prepare us for those two steps, Ruach Shel Tshuva, the spirit of Tshuva, and the result of that, which is the smell of Elul, the smell of Mashiach, which is achieved through Tshuva, the Frierdiker Rebbe says there's some intermediate step that is required, namely, the avir, the air starts to change. What does that mean? It means as follows. There are certain essentials that people require in order to live. Boy, you need a place to live. Clothing, lechem lechol, food to eat, mayim lishtos, water to drink, vavir lineshima, and air to breathe. That's an ascending order of importance. It's more important for a person to have clothes than to have their own house. You have to have food more than you have to have clothes. You need drink more than food. V'anochutz mikulam, and the single most essential element of human survival is avir l'neshima, air to breathe. She'ech rechius tom tmidis. That's a constant need. Without air, person can't survive even a short period of time. So therefore, because the requirement for air is so profound, and the nature of people is that you're constantly breathing air all the time, itself and if anything shifts in the air, every person will feel it immediately and it will affect them all the time. That's what the Frierdiker Rebbe is referring to when he speaks about air over here. The spirit of tshuva, the smell of Mashiach, which is the result of tshuva, they all become available during Elul because there's a shift in the air that you breathe in Elul. The implication is the air that you breathe is not something you have to produce. It's there, you just inhale it. That means the potential for the tshuva of Elul doesn't need unusual effort. And in the same way as air is essential to everybody, the tshuva of Elul is essential to everybody. And that gives life to every single one of us in every breath that we take, as the famous the famous statement of the Gemara on the pasuk that every soul will praise Hashem. It says al kol neshima uneshima, every breath that we take will bring us to praise Hashem. In other words, Elul is a time we can literally breathe in a sense. The tshuva of Elul doesn't require the same degree of effort and the same degree of difficulty as perhaps at other times of the year. It's much more accessible. And with Hashem, we should use it directly through our efforts of tshuva during Elul. We should come to the Reichoi Shel Mashiach, the smell of Mashiach Morech V'Doin, who should take us straight away to Yerushalayim and to the Beis HaMikdash, take it from Yad Mamash.